was supposed to have 40 bodies in D block. That's the absolute rule of the graveyard shift. 40 cells, 40 inmates. But at 2:14 a.m., when I swept my mag light across cell 118, I counted 41. People who don't work corrections think the worst part of a maximum security prison is the noise, the shouting, the metal banging, the constant threat of a riot. They're wrong. The worst part is the silence. Between 2 a.m. and 5 a.m., the concrete walls absorb everything. The air gets heavy. It feels like the building itself is holding its breath. I was 6 months into my rotation at a state penitentiary in the Midwest. D block was administrative segregation. ADSEG, solitary. The guys in here weren't just serving time. They were the ones who couldn't play nice with the general population. One man to a cell. Solid steel doors with a narrow plexiglass viewing slit. At 2 a.m., protocol mandates a physical head count. You don't just look for a lump under the blanket. You need to see skin. A face, a hand, a foot, something breathing. Inmates are smart. They'll build dummies out of toilet paper rolls and laundry bags just to mess with the rookies. I started at the bottom tier. Cell 101, everything normal. The heavy thud of my standard-issue boots on the concrete was the only sound echoing down the 100-yard corridor. I was marking the clipboard as I walked. Cell 110, clear. Cell 115, clear. Then I hit 118. The occupant was inmate Miller, a guy doing life without parole. I stepped up to the steel door, clicked my mag light on, and shined the beam through the scratched plexiglass slit. Miller was on his bunk, facing the wall. I saw the steady rise and fall of his shoulder. Count verified. But as I started to pull the flashlight away, the beam swept across the concrete floor beneath his steel bed frame. My breath hitched in my throat. Crouched in the narrow, 18-inch gap between the bottom of the mattress and the cold floor was a man. My brain completely misfired. First thought, Miller has a cellmate. Second thought, D block doesn't have cellmates. I froze. My thumb hovered over the emergency radio button on my shoulder mic. I told myself my eyes were playing tricks on me. Exhaustion. Shadows playing off the harsh white beam of the flashlight. I took a step back, blinked hard, and stepped up to the glass again. I angled the mag light downward. It wasn't a shadow. He was folded up in a way a human spine shouldn't bend, pressing his back against the cinder block wall under the bed. He wasn't wearing the standard orange or khaki jumpsuits. He was wearing a filthy, oversized gray uniform, the kind this facility hadn't issued since the 90s. I couldn't see his face. His head was tucked between his knees. My hand started shaking. I unclipped my radio, pressing the transmit button. Control, this is post 4. I need a recount verification on D block. I'm showing an extra body in 118. The radio crackled. The dispatcher's voice came back, sounding bored. Post 4, count is locked at 40. You're seeing things, man. Walk it again. I swallowed hard. My mouth tasted like copper. I didn't want to look back through that glass. Every instinct I had developed in this job was screaming at me to back away from the door, to walk back to the control bubble and lock myself inside. But if I left an unsecured, undocumented individual in a max security cell, I'd lose my badge by sunrise. I gripped my PR-24 baton with my left hand, pulling it halfway out of the ring on my belt. With my right hand, I brought the flashlight back up to the slit. I aimed the beam directly under the bed. He wasn't looking at the floor anymore. His head was turned sideways, resting flat on the concrete, staring directly up at the plexiglass slit, staring directly into my flashlight beam. His eyes didn't reflect the light like a normal person's. They were entirely dilated, pitch-black pools sinking into a pale, sunken face. And he was smiling, a wide, unnatural, ear-to-ear grin that pulled his cracked lips back over yellow teeth. He wasn't blinking. He was just smiling at me. Miller was still sleeping peacefully right above him. I tried to hit my radio button again, to call a code Alpha, to scream for backup. But my fingers wouldn't move. My lungs completely locked up. Slowly, without breaking eye contact, the man under the bed reached his hand up from the shadows. His fingers were abnormally long, the joints thick and knotted. He pressed a single filthy finger vertically against his own smiling lips.
Edward 182-2949, lots of DS.
Special DS, go ahead, the next one.
Highway 93 in Nevada is a two-lane strip of dead asphalt that cuts straight through the desert. No streetlights, no cell service, just 300 miles of absolute black. It was 3:15 a.m. I was in the passenger seat of a Department of Corrections transport van. My partner, Carter, was driving. We were doing a level 4 ghost transfer. That's what we call it when we move a high-value target in the dead of night off the official books to avoid ambushes. The guy in the back was a cartel enforcer, a cleaner. He had killed 6 people on the outside and 2 inmates on the inside. When you transport a level 4, protocol is absolute. You don't take chances. We had him in full, maximum security restraints. That means heavy steel leg irons around his ankles, a marten chain wrapped securely around his waist, and his wrists were handcuffed together, locked tight inside a hard plastic black box that prevents any manipulation of the keyholes. The padlock on the waist chain secured the whole rig. He couldn't even wipe his own nose, let alone fight. He was locked in the rear compartment, separated from the cab by a half-inch thick, welded steel mesh divider. For the first 2 hours, the only sound was the drone of the diesel engine and Carter tapping his thumb on the steering wheel. The inmate hadn't made a single sound. Not a cough, not a shuffle, just dead silence behind the steel mesh. We were 90 miles from the nearest town. No headlights in the rearview mirror, no oncoming traffic, just the narrow beam of our headlights chewing through the desert darkness. I was staring out the passenger window into the pitch black, fighting to keep my eyes open. Then I heard it. It was sharp, heavy, metallic. It sounded exactly like the spring-loaded jaw of a padlock snapping open. Carter stopped tapping his thumb on the steering wheel. He didn't look at me, but I saw his posture instantly stiffen. He kept his eyes locked on the dark road ahead. "Tell me that was a rock hitting the undercarriage," Carter whispered. I didn't answer. I slowly unholstered my Glock 22, resting it flat on my thigh. I kept my breathing shallow. Then came the second sound. It was the unmistakable ratcheting sound of standard issue handcuffs being pulled open along their teeth. The blood drained completely out of my face. My stomach dropped into free fall. The black box system is designed to be inescapable without a key. To get the cuffs open, he would have had to bypass the padlock, unthread the waist chain, remove the hardened plastic cover, and pick the double locks on the cuffs themselves. In the pitch dark, and he had just done it without making a single sound, right up until the final click. "Do not look back," Carter said, his voice barely a breath. "Do not let him know we heard it." I looked down at the GPS. We were exactly halfway between the departure facility and the drop-off point. We were in a rolling steel box, completely alone. The procedural manual says if an inmate breaches restraints during transport, you pull over immediately, exit the vehicle, draw weapons, and secure the perimeter. But we weren't dealing with a petty thief. We were dealing with cartel. If we pulled over on this dark, empty stretch of desert, we were sitting ducks. For all we knew, an SUV running without headlights was trailing us a mile back, waiting for us to stop so they could execute us on the shoulder of the highway. But if we kept driving, we were locked in a cab with a free, lethal killer sitting just inches behind our heads, separated only by a steel grate. He was moving. I could hear the heavy steel links of the waist chain slithering across the metal floor of the rear compartment. He was standing up. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. The air inside the cab suddenly felt freezing cold. I slowly turned my head, just an inch, catching the reflection of the rearview mirror. The rear compartment was completely unlit, but standing pressed flush against the steel mesh, directly behind my seat, was a massive dark silhouette. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't trying to break the mesh. He was just standing there in the dark, watching us. I gripped my Glock so hard my knuckles turned white. I clicked the safety off. The tiny snick echoed loudly in the cab. He tapped the mesh. Slow, methodical strikes. He was holding the heavy, unlocked brass padlock. He leaned forward. I felt his breath hit the back of my neck through the holes in the steel divider. In a low, perfectly calm voice, he whispered right into my ear, "Pull over."